I am never waiting this long for a movie like this ever again. Finally, X-Men Days of Future Past is directed by Bryan Singer, written by Simon Kinberg, and is of course based on the original storyline by Chris Claremont and John Byrne. And this movie stars an insanely large cast from like 6 previous movies, but of course your main players here are Hugh Jackman, James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and Jennifer Lawrence. And in X-Men Days of Future Past, in the distant future, Sentinels have pretty much taken over the Earth. You know, they're killing mutants and humans, and this last remnant of the X-Men decide to send Wolverine back to the past in 1973 in order to stop the Sentinel program from ever happening. And in the past, Logan must figure out a way to kind of bring back Professor X into the fight, and of course to free Magneto and to somehow get these two to agree so they can all help in stopping the whole Sentinel thing. Now, Days of Future Past functions as a sequel to both the established timelines of the X-Men franchise. You know, first you have the timeline established through X-Men X2, X-Men The Last Stand, X-Men Origins Wolverine a bit, and the Wolverine. So everything that happens in this dystopian or apocalyptic future is a sequel to that first timeline. Everything that happens in 1973 is technically a sequel to X-Men First Class. This is also like the biggest superhero movie ever, like since the Avengers. Like so much is riding on this. Like if this works out, it's great. You know, it kind of validates the entire X-Men franchise. But if this does not work out, not good news for Fox. However, I really do think that X-Men Days of Future Past was well worth the wait. I'm never waiting that long again, but it was so worth the wait. Like this is like a definition of a summer blockbuster. Like it is extremely fun to watch, extremely satisfying. It's a great watch. First of all, this series just keeps looking better and better. Like Days of Future Past definitely is like the best this series has ever looked. And what the cool thing is, you have these two timelines, you know, apocalyptic future and 1973. The cool thing is that with the apocalyptic future, you kind of see like echoes of the first 3 X-Men movies in the look of this future. You know, like it's very dark and silvery, but it's like amped up to 1,000. You know, like it's so bleak and desolate. But in 1973, you get the sense of that whole X-Men First Class color thing. You know, like it's much brighter, it's much happier there. And in terms of CGI, it's also kind of follows the same pattern because in the apocalyptic future thing, you know, you have it's definitely much more visual effects heavy, but it's never really saturated. But with the 1973 timeline, there is lots of CGI also, but it fits very well within this real world context. But what's great is even if there is a lot of CGI in the movie, they don't really rely on it so much because there's lots of practical things here done. Like, you know, whenever you have Beast running around, you can tell it's just Nicholas Hoult on like wires and stuff, and I love that, you know. Yeah, of course, the makeup and costume department still do great jobs. They really kind of cleaned up Magneto's costume here. The makeup on Mystique and Beast still looks great. The two mutants that I kind of want to just like mention here, number one is Blink. Like I've never really read the comics again for the X-Men, so I never knew about Blink, but I just thought her power was so cool. She pretty much just plays Portal all the time. Like it's just so fun to watch. And of course you have Quicksilver, who I will talk about later, and you know just the way they show how fast he is and stuff. It's just so cool. Like they have so much fun with Quicksilver, and what I love about the X-Men franchise so far is that you know they always find new ways to kind of play with these powers, and it's really fun. But this movie looks great, not just in terms of visual effects, but just downright, you know, cinematography. You know, like more than ever, there's some shots in this movie that are just like, wow, that looks incredible. And not just in like the visual look of the film, like even in just like camera movements, everything looks great because there's so many mutants to work with here, and the camera just kind of keeps up with it. You know, like it's so dynamic the way this camera moves around because you know when Professor X is doing his thing where he searches through the minds of people, like the camera kind of just keeps on zooming in to different faces. But then when the movie shifts over to Magneto and him being all theatrical and stuff, like, this movie really knows when to start showing like a wide shot. They also have this really cool thing where they kind of show certain events through like a 70s camera. And what's so cool about it is that when you see the action through this old school camera, it looks so much scarier. Like you're put into the shoes of this photographer, and you can see why it's so scary because apparently mutants on film just look really scary. In my opinion, X-Men Days of Future Past is like it's paced just so well because the action never lets up. Like as soon as this movie starts, like you're in it, and like for me, this movie never slows down. But again, it never just feels like it's beating you over the head with action. Like it really just keeps you on this one constant track. And even when this movie has to jump timelines from past to future, future to past, it never feels like uneven. Like they obviously show the past more than the future, but they just show enough of the future to let you know that it's a really dire situation. Also, like for a good solid 30 minutes of this movie, like somewhere near the end, like the tension was just unbearable, man. Like I had no idea how they were gonna finish it. One thing that really helps that out, I think, one element that's just as dynamic as like the cinematography and stuff, is the music from John Ottman. He did the music for X2 and he's back here. And his score is great because, it has to be grand or brooding and dark. It is. But when it has to be emotional and stuff, it is also without being overbearing. It really just kind of supports those emotions. Speaking of being like X2, the plot here, I really, really liked it because it's very nice and tight. It's very tightly written like an X2, it's going just on one track. They don't really, you know, pull off to like a side story or anything. When they do have to go to a side story, it really just feels like it's a natural extension of the main plot, but they stay in the same track. But what I love about this plot is that it does not, this movie doesn't rely on the plot because the plot is big enough as it is, and you could have just relied on that. But this really is still very character driven. Like they really do push every single character to a different place. Even those we don't really get to see that much in like the future timeline, it's enough for me to know that they're fighting against these Sentinels and they're some of the last mutants on Earth. And just like X-Men First Class, this movie has a great mix of humor and drama. Like it again doesn't feel jarring at all. It's very balanced. It always feels like it's on the same track. And then we get to the acting. Of course, like one of the best things about the X-Men franchise is that the acting is always great. And of course, just to get it out of the way, Hugh Jackman again is great as Wolverine. I seem to notice that as the X-Men movies progressed, like the writing doesn't the writers don't really change Wolverine that much. Like they just add like little things to add to his character. But Hugh Jackman does such a good job committing to this role that it really feels like he plays a different kind of Wolverine or Logan in every movie. And here you have a much more restrained Logan. Like he's in a position that he's not used to. That he has to be the mediator. He has to bring two people together. He can't just come in claws blazing. James McAvoy is fantastic as Professor X. Like definitely, it's just there's so many layers to this guy. Like especially his version of Professor X. He's at his lowest low in this movie. There's so many feelings of he feels betrayed. He feels self pity. He doesn't want anything to do with the outside world anymore, and he captures it so well while still staying somewhat charming. And it's really great to see him like side by side with Patrick Stewart because Patrick Stewart is like the embodiment of wisdom, and just seeing them side by side, like they're so different, but you can kind of like draw the line between them. Same thing goes for Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen as Magneto. Michael Fassbender here as Magneto is just terrifying. Like he's so powerful in this movie, and you can really tell that absolutely no compromises whatsoever. Like he will get his way. But again, at the same time, when you compare him to Ian McKellen's Magneto, you can kind of see how that turned into that because the Magneto Ian McKellen plays in Days of Future Past has grown so much, and it's just so great to see that parallel. I really also liked how Jennifer Lawrence played Mystique in this movie because in X Men First Class, she kind of played Mystique as more of this kind of naive girl who was still trying to figure out where she was in the world. But here, she really does start to feel like how Rebecca Romijn played Mystique in the first three X Men movies. Here, she's really this cunning like spy of sorts, and she's really really ruthless. Also, like you can tell she kind of combined what she learned from Charles with what she learned from Eric, and that's a very dangerous combination. Also, it's just great to see, Jennifer Lawrence is actually kicking butt this time. It's great. And again, I have to give a shout out to Nicholas Hoult, who is turning out to be like one of these really great young actors of this generation. Like he really does develop his character just very subtly. He doesn't have a big role, but you can tell that there is emotion behind him. And I'm pretty sure that's him in the Beast makeup, and he does a great job, as Beast. Peter Dinklage is in this movie, and I just love the fact that they cast him in this movie. Like they didn't care that he was of a smaller size or anything, because Peter Dinklage in this movie is fantastic. Like again, he doesn't have as big a role as the others, but whenever he's on screen, he just really takes that time and turns it into gold. Like every single, like there's so many little nuances to his character, and you really understand where he's coming from. And of course, going back to Quicksilver, Evan Peters plays Quicksilver, and he's great because he's just this happy-go-lucky kid. He's not involved with the war or anything. Like he doesn't really know anything about the Sentinels. He's just a kid who wants to have fun. But of course, most of this is really thanks to, of course, the returning king of the X-Men film franchise. Bryan Singer directs this movie, and he directs it so well again. Balance is the name of Singer's game here. Last, he really has a good hold on these characters and how to, make the movie be about them instead of like the big situation around them. He also knows how to milk scenes. Like he knows when a scene calls for like lots of gratuitous, just like fun and excitement, but it just feels perfectly right, like it never feels like there's too much action or anything. It never feels like there's too little. It always feels perfect, at least for me. Bryan Singer really is to thank for like certain sequences in this movie that are just absolutely breathtaking. Like you see a bunch of them in the trailer already, like the one where Magneto kind of raises a stadium up, or the entire Quicksilver scene in the Pentagon it's mind blowing. Like Quicksilver pretty much steals the movie at that point. However, I only really have like one real problem with this movie, but it's kind of a problem that really bothered me throughout the movie. It's that, the more I thought about, the plot of this movie and stuff, the more I realized that not a lot of things exactly really make sense. Like, the biggest problem I had, the biggest plot hole was, why is Professor X like all alive and well here after the events of X-Men: The Last Stand? Because, this movie makes it very clear that those movies happened. They are, at least for the time being, canon. Like X-Men: The Last Stand happened. What happened to Professor X there, I thought would be irreversible, and I was waiting for them to explain the situation, and they didn't. I can just accept like one line of dialogue, even if it's like the stupidest excuse ever, I will accept it, but they never explain it. So that to me feels a bit lazy. Like, I don't know, they did kind of want to face having like a stupid reason. Like, instead they went around it by not having a reason at all, and I don't like that. And there are lots of little tiny things that, individually seem like nitpicks, but, together it really does kind of feel like the script isn't as tight as I thought it was initially. But take note that these things, they did not detract at all from my enjoyment of the movie. It's just, objectively speaking, when I look at this movie and when I have to review it, I have to admit that there are a lot of kind of little silly things just kind of thrown in there for convenience. But anyway, while I can't call X-Men Days of Future Past like a truly great movie, not just yet, I really do think it's a really, really good movie, and I loved watching it. You do kind of have to watch the other movies if you want to really fully understand what's happening here, but for the most part, I think it does stand well on its own. My only concern is that this movie felt like such a good ending to the franchise, because I don't know, everything was just so epic, and just the way it ended for me was perfect. So like, I'm kind of bummed that they announced that there was gonna be X-Men Apocalypse in like 20 something. Like, I just really, really like Days of Future Past as it was, but anyway, whatever. So far, like, this is definitely the best X-Men movie we've ever got. Great job, Bryan Singer. Great job, everybody. You're an amazing cast. I love you. Alright, guys, that is finally my review for X-Men Days of Future Past. Have you guys seen it? I'm sure you have already. What did you guys think about it? Whether you loved it or you hated it, whether you agreed with me or not, please leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.